Hey guys, this is a video where I'm just going to read that Stone Soup article, nonfiction article for you out loud in case you'd rather listen to it. Good. In case you'd rather listen to it instead of reading it yourself. As always, I want you to read along with me if you choose to listen, okay? So once again, it looks like this is in the $15 main course category. It says, read the following nonfiction article, Stone Soup, by Barbara Kingsolver, then answer the accompanying questions. And you only have to choose 4 of those questions to answer. You do not have to answer every single one of them. Okay, so let's read this out loud. Stone Soup, what does it mean to be a family anyway? In the catalog of family values, where do we rank an occasion like this? A curly-haired boy who wanted to run before he walked, age 7 now. A soccer player scoring a winning goal. He turns to the bleachers with his fist in the air and a smile wide as a gap-toothed galaxy. His own cheering section of grown-ups and kids all leap to their feet and hug each other, delirious with love for this boy. He's Andy, my best friend's son. The cheering section includes his mother and her friends, his brother, his father and stepmother, a stepbrother and stepsister, and a grandparent. Lucky is a child with this many relatives on hand to hail a proud accomplishment. I'm there too, witnessing a family fortune. But in spite of myself, defensive words take shape in my head. I'm thinking, I dare anybody to call this a broken home. Families change and remain the same. Why are our names for homes so slow to catch up with the truth of where we live? When I was a child, I had 2 parents who loved me without cease. One of them intended every excuse for attention I ever contrived, and the other made it to the ones with higher production values, like piano recitals and appendicitis. So I was a lucky child too. I played with a set of paper dolls called the Family of Dolls, 4 in number, who came with the factory-assigned names of Dad, Mom, Sis, and Junior. I think you know what they looked like, at least before I loved them to death and their heads fell off. Now I've replaced the dolls with a life. I knit my days around my daughter's survival and happiness, and am proud to say her head is still on. But we aren't the family of dolls. Maybe you're not either. And if not, even though you are statistically no oddity, it's probably been suggested to you 100 ways that yours isn't exactly a real family, but an imposter family, a cultural ruin, a slapdash substitute, something like counterfeit money. Here at the tail end of our century, most of us are up to our ears in the noisy business of trying to support and love a thing called family. But there's a current in the air with ferocious moral force that finds its way even into political campaigns, claiming there is only one right way to do it, the way it's always been. In the face of a thriving, parti-colored world, this narrow view is so pickled and absurd, I'm astonished that it gets airplay, and I'm astonished that it still stings. Every parent has endured the arrogance of a child-unfriendly group sitting in judgment, explaining what those kids of ours really need. For example, a good licking. If we're polite, we move our crew to another bench on the park. If we're forthright, as I am in my mind, only for the rest of the day, we fix them with a sweet, imperious stare and say, come back and let's talk about it after you've changed 1,000 diapers. But it's harder somehow to shrug off the Family of Dolls Family Views crew when they judge that divorced people, blended families, gay families, and single families are failures, that our children are at risk, and the whole arrangement is messy and embarrassing. A marriage that ends is not called finished, it's called failed. The children of this family may have been born to a happy union, but now they are called the children of divorce. I had no idea how thoroughly these assumptions overlaid my culture until I went through divorce myself. I wrote to a friend. This might be worse than being widowed. Overnight, I've suffered the same losses, companionship, financial, and practical support. My identity as a wife and partner, the future I've taken for granted. I'm lonely, grieving, and hard-pressed to take care of my household alone. But instead of bringing casseroles, people are acting like I had a fit and broke up my family china. Once upon a time, I held these beliefs about divorce, that everyone who does it could have chosen not to, that it's a lazy way out of marital problems, that it selfishly puts personal happiness ahead of family integrity. Now I tremble for my ignorance. It's easy and fortunate at times to forget about the ambush that could have had your head reeling. Serious mental or physical illness, death in the family, abandonment, financial calamity, humiliation, violence, and despair. I started out like any child, intent on being the family of dolls. I set upon young womanhood believing in most of the doctrines of my generations. I wore my skirts 4 inches above the knee. I had that Barbie with her zebra striped swimsuit and a figure unlike any found in nature. And I understood the Prince Charming theory of marriage, a quest for Mr. Right, that ends smack dab where you find him. I did not completely understand that another whole story begins there. And no fairy tale prepared me for the combination of bad luck and persistent hope that would interrupt my dream and lead me to other arrangements. Like a cancer diagnosis, a dying marriage is a thing to fight, to deny, and finally, when there's no choice left, to dig in and survive. Casseroles would help. Likewise, I imagine it must be a painful reckoning in adolescence or later on to realize true love will never look like the soft focus fragrance ads because Prince Charming, surprise, is a princess, or vice versa, or has a skin color your parents didn't want you messing with except in the Crayola box. It's awfully easy to hold in contempt the straw broken home, that mythical category of persons who toss away nuclear family for the sheer fun of it. Even the legal terms we use have a suggestion of caprice. I resent the phrase irreconcilable. I can say that word, it's not coming to me. Send me a video of you saying it. I don't have you in class to say it for me. Irreconcilable. Differences. Negotiating where to set the thermostat is not the point. A non-functioning marriage is a slow asphyxiation. It's a waking up despised each morning, listening to the pulse of your own loneliness before the radio begins to blare its raucous gospel that you're nothing if you aren't loved. It's a sharing your airless house with the threat of suicide and other kinds of violence while the ghost that whispers, "Leave here and destroy your children," has passed over every door and nailed it shut. Disassembling a marriage in these circumstances is as much fun as amputating your own leg. You do it, if you can, to save a life or two or more. I know of no one who really went looking to hoe the harder row, especially the daunting of a single parenthood. Yet it seems to be the most American to customs to blame that burden for your destiny. We'd like so desperately to believe in freedom and justice for all, we can hardly name that rogue of bad luck, even when he's a close enough snake to bite us. In the wake of my divorce, some friends, even a few close ones, choose to vanish rather than linger without striking distance of misfortune. But most stuck around. Bless their hearts. And if I'm any the wiser for my trials, it's from having learned the worth of steadfast friendship, and also what not to say. The least helpful question is, did you want a divorce or didn't you? Did I want to keep that leg or not? How to explain in a culture of choice two terrifying options are much worse than none at all. Give me any day the quick hand of cruel fate that will leave me scared but blameless. As it was, I keep thinking of that wicked third-grade joke in which some boy comes up behind you and grabs your ear, starts in with a prolonging tug, and asks, "Do you want this ear any longer?" Still, the friend who holds your hand and says the wrong thing is made dearer stuff than anyone who stays away. And generally through it all you live. My favorite fictional character, Kate Vaden, by the novels of Reynolds Price, advises, "Strength just comes in one brand. You stand up at sunrise and meet what they send you and keep your hair combed. Once you've weathered the straits, get across the tricky juncture from casualty to survivor. If you're on your feet and at the end of a year or two have been putting together a happy new existence, those friends who were kind enough to feel sorry for you when you needed it most now accept you back to the ranks of the living. If you're truly blessed, they will dance at your second wedding. Everyone else, for heaven's sake, should stop throwing stones." Arguing about whether non-traditional families deserve pity or tolerance is a little like the medieval debate about left-handedness as a mark of the devil. Divorce, remarriage, single parenthood, gay parents, blended families simply are. They're facts of our time. Some of the reasons listed by sociologists for these family reconstructions are the idea of marriage as a romantic partnership rather than a pragmatic one, a shift in women's expectations from serving to self-respect and independence. The longevity prior to antibiotics, no marriage was expected to last many decades. In colonial days, the average couple lived to be married less than 12 years. And to all this, our growing sense of entitlement to happiness and safety from abuse. Most would agree these are all good things, yet their result, a culture in which serial monogamy and the consequent reshaping of families are the norm, gets diagnosed as failing. For many of us, once we have put ourselves humpty-dumpty wise back together again, the main problem with our reorganized family is that other people think we have a problem. My daughter tells me the only time she's uncomfortable about being the child of a divorced parent is when her friends say they feel sorry for her. It's bizarre, given that half the kids in her schools and nation are in the same boat, pursuing childish happiness with the same energy as their married parent peers. When anyone asks how she feels about it, she spontaneously lists the benefits. Our house is in the country, and we have a dog. But she can go to her dad's neighborhood for the urban thrills of a pool and sidewalks or roller skating. What's more, she has 3 sets of grandparents. Why is it surprising that a child would revel in the widening family and the right to feel at home in more than one house? Isn't it the opposite that should worry us? A child with no home at all, or too few resources to feel safe. The child at risk is the one whose parents are too immature themselves to guide wisely, too diminished by poverty to nurture, too far from opportunity to offer hope. The number of children in the U.S. living in poverty in this moment is almost an unfathomable large, 20%. There are families among us that need help, and by no means are they new to the landscape. The rate at which teenage girls had babies in 1957, 96 per thousand, was twice that it is now. The remarkable statistic is ignored by the religious right, probably because the teen birth rate was cut in half mainly by legalized abortion. In fact, the policy gatekeepers who coined the phrase family values has steadfastly ignored the desperation of two small families, and since 1979 has steadily reduced the amount of financial support available to a single parent. But this camp's most unspoken attacks seemed to aim at the notion of families getting too complex, with add-ons and extras such as gay parents' partner or a remarried mother's new husband and her children. To judge a family's value by its tidy symmetry is to purchase a book for its cover. There's no moral authority here. The famous family comprised of dad, mom, sis, and junior living in an isolated economic unit is not built on historical bedrock. In The Way We Never Were, Stephanie Cortez writes, "Whenever people propose that we go back to the traditional family, I always suggest they pick a ballpark date for the family they have in mind. Colonial families were tidily disciplined, but their members, meaning everyone but infants, labored incessantly and died young. Then the Victorian family adopted a new diversion of labor in which women's role was domestic and allowed time for study and play, but this was an upper-class construct supported by the myriad slaves." Coons writes, "For every 19th century middle-class family that protected its wife and child within the family circle, there was an Irish or German girl scrubbing the floors, a Welsh boy mining coal to keep the home-baked goods warm, a black girl doing the family laundry, a black mother and child picking cotton to be made into clothes for the family, and a Jewish or Italian daughter in a sweatshop making ladies' dresses or artificial flowers for the family to purchase." During the Depression, and up until the end of World War II, many millions of U.S. households were more multi-generational than nuclear. Women, my grandmother's age, were likely to live in a fluid assortment of elderly relatives, in-laws, siblings, children. In many cases, they spent virtually every waking hour working in the company of other women. A companionable scenario in which it would be easier, I imagine, to tolerate an estranged or difficult spouse. I'm reluctant to idealize a life of so much hard work and so little spousal intimacy, but its advantage may have been resilience. A family so large and varied would not easily be brought down by a single blow. It could absorb a death, long illness, abandonment here and there, and any number of irreconcilable differences. The family of dolls came along mid-century as a great American experiment. A booming economy required a mobile labor force and demanded that women surrender jobs to returning soldiers. Families came as an earlier age than ever before, and in unprecedented numbers. They raised children in urban isolation. The nuclear family was launched to sink or swim. More than a few sank. Social historians corroborate that suburban family of the post-war economic boom, which we have recently selected as our definition of traditional. 25% of Americans were poor in the mid-1950s, and yet there was no food stamps. 60% of the elderly lived on less than $1,000 a year, and most had no medical insurance. Alcoholism and sexual abuse of children were far more widespread than anyone imagined. Expectations soared, and the economy sagged. It's hard to depend on one other adult for everything, come what may. In the last 3 decades, the adaptable structure we call family has been reshaped once more than economic tides. Compared to 50s families, mothers are far more likely to be employed. We're statistically more likely to divorce and to live in blended families or other extranuclear arrangements. We have also more likely to plan and space our children and to rate our marriages as happy. We're less likely to suffer abuse without resources or to stare at our lives through a glaze of prescription tranquilizers. Our aged parents are less likely to be destitute, and we're half as likely to have a teenage daughter turn up a mother herself. All in all, I'd say that if intact in modern family values jargons means living quietly desperate in the bell jar, then hip hooray for the broken families. A neat family model constructed to service the baby boom economy seems to be returning gradually to a grand lumpy shape that human families apparently have tended toward since they first took root. We're social animals, deeply fond of companionship, and childish love best to run in packs. If there is a normal for humans at all, I expect it to look like 2 or 3 families of dolls, connected variously by kinship and passion, shuffled like cards and strewn over several shoeboxes. The sooner we can let go of the family or the fairy tale of family functioning perfectly in isolation, the better we might be to embrace the relief of community. Even the admirable parents who stayed married through thick and thin are very likely at present to incorporate other adults into the families. Household help and babysitters if they can afford them, neighbors, grandparents if they can't. For single parents, this support is the rock bottom definition of family. And most parents who have split apart, however, painfully still manage to maintain family continuity for their children, creating, in many cases, a phenomenon that Constance abhors in her book, The Good Divorce, calls binuclear family. Call it what you will. When ex-spouses beat swords into plowshares and jump up and down at soccer games, it makes for a happy kid. Cinderella. Who needs her? And those evil stepsisters, that story always seemed like too much cotton-picking fuss over clothes. A childhood tale that fascinated me more was the one called Stone Soup. And the gist of it is this. Once upon a time, a pair of soldiers straggled home to a village empty-handed in a land ruined by war. They were famished, but the villagers had so little they shouted evil words and slammed their doors. The soldiers dragged out a big kettle, filled it with water, and put it on the fire to boil. They rolled a clean, round stone into the pot, while the villagers peered through their curtains in amazement. "What kind of soup is that?" they hooted. "Stone soup," the soldier replied. "Everyone can have some when it's done." "Well, thanks," one matron grumbled, coming out with a shriveled carrot. "But it'd be better if you threw this in." And so on, of course, a vegetable at a time, until the whole suspicious village managed to feed itself grandly. Any family is a big empty pot, save for what gets thrown in. Each stew turns out different. Generosity, a resolve to turn back bad luck into good, and respect for variety, these things will nourish a nation of children. Name-calling and suspicion will not. My soup contains a rock or two of hard times, and maybe yours does too. I expect it's one heck of a good soup. The end. Okay, let me get back to my video. So guys, that is a nonfiction article. Basically the gist of it is that families don't all look the same, and that's okay. Blended families and divorced families and happily married 2-parent families, they're all good and they're all okay and they all do the job. And it's like when we did the Heritage Project, and I made sure, on that project to tell you that your family might be your best friend. Your family might be your aunt. Your family might be a stepbrother. Your family might be a cousin. Your family might be a stepmom. It didn't matter, because that, who you spoke to didn't, what am I trying to say here? Just because it wasn't the cookie cutter, mom, dad, sister, brother, doesn't mean you don't have a family. Everybody's looks a little different these days, and there is nothing wrong with that. Okay, so choose 4 questions to answer that follow along with this story. Good luck.